Welcome into the Big City Sports Podcast. We have another episode today, and as always, joined by Swig, and we're talking the National Basketball Association today, going through Knicks, Nets, Bulls in that order. But before, I got to ask my man Swig, how you doing?
Doing pretty well, my guy. It's going to be a little bit more back to normal this week, at least for now after last week's episode. But we got some good feedback on that. We're happy for it. I hope people continue to become aware of that story if they haven't been yet. But good to catch up on the NBA and talk more on court sports because they're a lot less depressing. Well, for the most part. Hell, even the Giants managed to win a game this weekend, so that's something.
Yeah, and so did my Jaguars. They beat the Buffalo freaking Bills. How about that? Take
I did
that.
not see that
To
coming.
all my Bills fans out there watching the Chicago, New York station. If you're looking for Bills coverage, I'm sorry, it's not on this show. And they took it big time. There was only one Josh Allen that decided to step on the field that day, but that's neither here nor there. Let's dive into the NBA. You mentioned last week's episode. If you haven't checked it out, go check it out. Pressing issue with the Chicago Blackhawks organization, the whole scandal and everything with Kyle Beach, the sexual assault with the video coach. Be sure to check that out if you want to be informed on that matter. But as of right now, you mentioned it. We're diving right into the hardwood, and that's where we're going to start with the New York Knicks. And the Knicks, they picked up a win against the Joel Embiid-less 76ers squad earlier this week. But it hasn't really been a great season looking at game by game for the Knicks so far this season. I'm curious, what have you seen so far?
It's been inconsistent. There's definitely been some good things. The Knicks are 7-4 to start the season, and if you told me 2 years ago that I'd be complaining about a 7-4 start, then I would have called you nuts. So I mean, I'm trying to put this in perspective here. Watching a game by game, the only one I didn't watch so far was a game that I know the Knicks didn't play very well against the Raptors because I was at the Giants game that night instead, so I couldn't. But the games I've seen, the offenses look better, the defenses looked worse, is the short version, and the Knicks have been much better on the road than at home to start this young season. They've been inconsistent, especially in third quarters. They've had some rough second halves, and they've had a lot of trouble closing out games that they seem to be in decent control of. I'm hoping that they're ironing out some kinks early in the season because if those problems persist, it's going to make for a very up and down season as a whole. But we are 11 games in with 82 games on the schedule.
Yeah, it's been an interesting look so far for this Knicks squad. You mentioned a little bit of inconsistency with the 4 losses, 7 wins. That's still pretty good, but you said off pod that you saw 2 of those 4 losses in person, which is very unfortunate. But this Knicks team, as we continue to watch them throughout the course of the year, I mean, it's still early, so this is early reaction. We're just taking a look at how everything has played out. Mitchell Robinson back. He missed some time last year. He's a man in the middle. Been pretty solid throughout his NBA career. What have you seen? Well, let's start on the offensive side, not just Mitchell Robinson, but the Knicks as a whole offensively. Have you seen any changes from last year to this year?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one is the Knicks are taking a lot more three-pointers. They're a much more shooting-oriented team. I know there were rumors about that going into the season with the new additions of mostly Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier, bringing back pretty much everyone else who have all become pretty capable of shooting the three outside of the big men. And watching them stylistically, it's very different in terms of they're getting a lot of standstill threes. They're getting pretty good looks, but teams that rely on shooting, if you have an off night, you're not always going to have much else to make up for that. So I think that has happened once or twice so far in this young season. But offensively, I think so far Randall's showing that it's not just last season wasn't a fluke necessarily. He's had a couple of games where he hasn't been great. There's no doubt about that. But there have also been a couple where he shot the ball very well. He's put up 25, 28, 32. I think he scored 32 in the Philly game the other night. So I don't think that last year was a flash in the pan, but we also knew that the odds of him being as consistently ridiculous as he was last year was unlikely. But we have also seen games where he's looked good. There have been games where it looks like RJ Barrett's taken another leap. Derrick Rose is looking good again for sure. I think one of the bigger question marks has been Kemba Walker's been a little bit inconsistent here to start the season. And as a point guard goes, so does the team.
Yeah, he has to be that leader for this team. We saw him do it at UConn, saw him do it with Charlotte. I mean, he's an interesting guard in a sense that he can score on any given night, but you just don't know what night that's going to be. He's an inconsistent guard with his play. He steps up to he goes into the court game after game, just going in with the same mindset. But he's a good slasher, good playmaker, good shooter. That's obviously his best mark is shooting the basketball, but he can create plays on that offense too. So a little bit of inconsistency for him to start the season. That makes a lot of sense in that area. So do you think that that's something that could grow as the season lingers on? Or do you think there's enough guards here to where they could find a way to mix together and it's just a sort of a rotational thing right now?
Yeah, I honestly think it could go either way. I mean, this is a guy who is coming off some injury issues and a surgery and is learning a new offense. So trying to be patient here. We have seen flashes. Kemba Walker shot the three very well to start the season. It's just been other games where he's been a bit of a non-factor. And defensively, I wouldn't call him great. I know we're trying to focus on the offense. So he still provides a lot more offensively than last year's starting point guard, Elfrid Payton did. And I expect him to get better. But one thing I have noticed is the Knicks starters sometimes fall into an early hole, and the bench I think has been almost more reliable in a sense. And one thing I've noticed for sure, and I think the presence of Obi Toppin is a big part of this, Rose to a lesser extent. The Knicks pace offensively is light years faster with Obi Toppin on the court compared to Julius Randle, but more broadly with the bench on the court compared to the starters. That Julius Randle, as great as he can be, sometimes the ball can stop with him and it can slow down and you go too isolation heavy. And I don't really love to see that. You see a lot less of that, for better or worse. With the bench on the court, it turns into a much more of a track meet.
Yeah, I get that point. You know, Obi Toppin definitely a high flyer. That's his game. He likes to get the alley oops, make the flashy plays, and basically get up and down the court and work in transition. As opposed to Julius Randle, you mentioned ISO ball. Sometimes that can do a little bit of a lull there offensively. But I want to switch over to the defense, and that's an area right now. I'm looking at the scores of these games for the Knicks so far. They've given up over 100 points in 7 of the 11 games. That can't make Coach Tom Thibodeau too happy.
No, I'm sure it doesn't. And one of the main reasons for that, so Mitchell Robinson, he is back, but missed the entire preseason. He's missed a game or two so far this year. I still like him a lot, but I think the nagging injuries played an impact in the game against Cleveland and caused him to sit out the game against Philadelphia. I hope that's not a lingering thing. Nerlens Noel missed the first 6-7 games of the year. He made his first appearance at the game I was at in Indianapolis, and he's been able to play since, but he did get hurt in the second half of or maybe it was the end of the first half of that 76ers game. And the big man depth is being tested earlier. Noel looked very good defensively, but those two are a huge key. They were last year for sure, but the perimeter defense around them has definitely, I'd say downgraded, at least to start this season. I would not call Evan Fournier an elite defender. No offense to him. I do think Reggie Bullock was better in that role on the defensive end of the court. And so far, the Knicks have been giving up a lot more open looks, as well as they played defensively last year. They did have a couple of things go in their favor in terms of lowest opponent 3-point percentage for most of the season and things like that. You knew that wasn't going to stick forever, but the Knicks have also been doing a poor job for the most part getting back in transition and limiting fast breaks, and it's led to a lot of easy layups or transition opportunities, and that's not helping the team.
Yeah, it's not helping the team at all when you give up points like that, especially in that magnitude. You mentioned the perimeter defense, and that's something, you bring in those pieces. Fournier not known for his defense. Kemba, you mentioned earlier how not the best defender in that area. Last year, the Knicks, that both of those players were not on the team last year. They found a way to shuttle down defensively, and they're one of the best defensive teams in the league last year. So what has to work in order for them to get back to that status?
Well, I think they need to make some adjustments with how they decide to either fight through or switch off on screens. That's a huge key. The health, frankly, of Mitchell Robinson and Nerlens Noel is going to be a huge factor. When those two are healthy, the rim protection is absolutely there and can make a huge difference. But without those two, I'm not sure if Noel is or Robinson is going to play in the next game against Milwaukee. I know that game will be out, done by the time this comes out, but I'm not sure if either of them will be available, but if not, it's going to be Taj Gibson and Jericho Sims as the only other options down low. And no offense to either of them. One of them I'd say is a little past his prime and one is completely unproven. That would be a defensive downgrade from what Robinson and Noel can provide, obviously. One thing I did see a little bit at the beginning of the year was Randall and Toppin playing more together or going more small ball lineups. And in the Philadelphia game, they went really small because they were missing not just Embiid, but Tobias Harris. Simmons is still out. They were missing Matisse Thybulle as well. So the Sixers were going small. The Knicks responded by putting out four guards and Randall. And I like the creativity, but I do want to see Toppin play more. I know that won't really help too much defensively, but I do think, especially in transition, he does provide an element that the rest of the team does not have. And I have liked how he's been attacking the basket so far this year in half court sets as well.
Yeah, I want to mention one more thing on Toppin and also quickly before we transition over to the Nets. Both of them drafted pretty high first round picks last year. Both of them not. It's not like they're not playing at all, but it's like you see potential bigger roles for them that you obviously have envisioned on the future, especially for Toppin. He's getting minutes taken away from him, but for young or for older players, more experienced players, do you expect that to change as the season goes on?
Honestly, no. If I'm being completely frank here, we didn't see any change last year, and I think Tom Thibodeau really values that 48 minutes of rim protection from the five spot. And I understand that Obi Toppin, I would not call him a great rim protector or anything. Mitchell Robinson, Nerlens Noel are both much better in that role. I would hope, theoretically, that if both of them were to miss hopefully just a game or two, because they are still very important. But if they were out for the short term, I would prefer to see more Toppin, and he can mix with Taj Gibson, who's I wouldn't call a great rim protector either, despite how savvy he is still. But Toppin only played 9 minutes in Philadelphia, and that includes the fact that Nerlens Noel did not play in the entire second half of the game, and Mitchell Robinson didn't play it at all in that game. So I haven't seen anything that would make me indicate that he's going to get big minutes unless there's a pretty significant change or something were to happen to Julius Randle.
Yeah, I can get behind that. I mean, it's sad to. Do you think that? I want to ask you one more question on Toppin. How do you think that'll affect his development? Do you think he's still okay with this, or do you think it's something that could affect him long term?
Well, it's hard for me to know, not being involved with the day-to-day practices and everything. I'm sure he would like to be playing more, but I have zero doubt about his work ethic. I've heard nothing but good things behind the scenes, both from players and Thibodeau and the other coaches. The work ethic, the attitude is there. He has shown improvement in the limited flashes. In the season opening game against the Celtics, I was really impressed with him. He played 25, 28 minutes, by far the most he has played in his NBA career so far. And I thought it was a lot more good than bad. And I've seen more good than bad in the limited 10 to 15 minutes he's gotten since. But considering the investment and considering that Robinson and Noel both have been battling nagging injuries for most of the last couple of years, I would like to see him get more of an opportunity. Quickly, the other first round pick, the backcourt depth for the Knicks is
Yeah.
definitely stronger this year than it was last year. So him and Alec Burks both have been getting less minutes, but quickly, after a bit of a cold start, he's been much better lately. And he's been earning the time. And Derrick Rose has been a huge X factor whenever he's come in. So I understand wanting to make sure he gets his minutes. So the Knicks are a relatively deep team when they're healthy. It can be a challenge, but I do want to see some adjustments here and there. But I also understand Thibodeau valuing winning every game to try to make another playoff appearance.
Yeah, that's the end result is a playoff appearance. The Knicks in a good spot right now, 7-4, 5-1 on the road. You mentioned 2-5, 2-3 at home. So hopefully that'll switch as they return to Madison Square Garden eventually as they continue on the course of the season. But hey, let's switch over to the worst team we cover, the Brooklyn Nets. The Brooklyn Nets sitting there at 7-4, dropped a game to the Chicago Bulls. The Brooklyn Nets, I mean, we mentioned the whole Kyrie Irving situation as we did our season preview. What have you seen from this Nets team as we start the year?
Well, Kevin Durant has been amazing. He is clearly at 100%. I think he quelled any doubts of that in the playoffs, but he looks amazing. I've been really impressed with Lamarcus Aldridge so far as well. I know he was a bit of a wild card. We know what a great career he's had, but he was out for a few months after the kind of abrupt retirement and then unretirement. I've been impressed with him. The Nets defensively, I think, have actually been better than expected so far, and offensively has been more of a mixed bag, but we also know the ridiculous amount of talent they have. And to be fair to the Nets here, them and the Knicks have the same record. So I don't know if it's fair to say worst team we cover as much as I would like to.
Oh, I saw that too. I saw both 7-4. I was like, we'll push Brooklyn down just a little bit there. But all right. That was
Telling
that was
Brooklyn to
more
go
of a,
fuck themselves. I love it.
yeah. That was the whole purpose of that argument there. But I've always believed, and I know we're going to look at the point guard position right now. I've always believed that Mr. Patty Mills is a walking bucket. He obviously hasn't started a game yet this year. He's played in 11 of them, but he is a walking bucket. He can come off the bench, score, does a lot of great things. I'm a big Patty Mills guy, but he obviously is not starting. I don't think he should start. But what do you think Patty Mills can bring to this team and what he has brought so far?
I like that move right away in the offseason. I thought it was a really good, pretty cheap signing. And I know the Nets have been relatively pressed against the salary cap with the huge stars they have on payroll. Provides some insurance for Kyrie Irving, whether it's injury or in this case, let's say off court reasons, that they would need somebody else to step in. On the court, we know he can score. We know he has some vision. He has chemistry with Lamarcus Aldridge, who he played with in San Antonio, and he has a lot of talent around him. And I think he can make an impact on the defensive end of the court as well. Brooklyn is fortunate that they don't need him to be one of their top 2 or 3 scorers. Like, not that he's incapable of it, but I don't think that would be the best way to maximize what he's able to do. He has the intangibles, the leadership, and he also has a pretty good amount of skill. And it can provide a different element for the Nets second unit than some of their starters can, especially with Kyrie Irving sidelined right now.
This team is just interesting because you look at Kevin Durant and he's obviously the leader of this team, and then there's James Harden, and I mean they're still 7-4. It's not like they're a bad team by any stretch. Some still think they're finals favorites or a team that could end up making a deep run in the playoffs, especially in the Eastern Conference. But you look at this team and it reminds me of the early days of Oklahoma City, when they just had Durant, Harden, Westbrook also there. But I mean, we have seen, I'm going to say it, we have seen nothing out of Blake Griffin this year. He is at a pretty bad year offensively, and his rebound total sitting around 4 a game. For a starting power forward, I think he's got to be better in that area. 22 minutes on the floor, you're only grabbing four boards a game. I think he's got to be better. I'm just calling him out on it right now. You still have Paul Millsap, another veteran there. He's not playing as often, getting 10 minutes a game, but I'm calling Blake Griffin out right now. I'd like to see more things out of him because they paid a hefty price to get him too.
So I've been more impressed with Aldridge. I think Griffin's been off to a bit of a slow start. I mean, it's still 4 more rebounds a game than we would end up with, in fairness.
Right. Yeah.
But
my 5'9" self isn't grabbing any boards in the NBA.
Yeah, I mean, we both might be Nate Robinson's height, but we also aren't going to win any slam dunk contests or grab too many rebounds. On the other hand, we're not going to get knocked out by YouTubers either. Anyway. I think Griffin's been off to a bit of a slow start, but I was impressed with him in the playoff run last year. I'm not too worried about him yet. I do think he will improve here as the season goes along. And Millsap at this point in his career, I do think it's best to have him in a more limited role. I don't think he's been quite the same player for the Nuggets the last couple of seasons, especially on the defensive end of the court. We do know that he can space the floor well, and the Nets can use that because as great as they can be offensively, there are times where they get get some guys in the lineup. Yeah, I wouldn't call Bruce Brown an elite shooter, for example. I wouldn't call DeAndre Bembry, who's getting some time various places, an elite shooter either. Same goes for Javon Carter. Like, there's some guys getting minutes that you might not necessarily think of. We've covered Brown extensively, and he deserves it. I think he's still used creatively, and with Jeff Green being gone, he could be looked at in an even more versatile way. But the Nets do have a few guys, namely Durant, Harden, Joe Harris, who we haven't mentioned yet, who are going to be best known for spacing the floor. And then you got guys like Griffin and Aldridge underneath who can operate from the high post, mid range, get to the basket, things like that. A lot of potential, but with a few new faces, I think they're still getting into the flow. And before that Bulls game, they did win 5 games in a row. So I wouldn't exactly say the sky is falling here.
Yeah, that's still a good feat heading into the Bulls game. The Bulls have been on fire. We'll get to them in a minute. But you mentioned Joe Harris. He's averaging 11 points per game, 31 minutes. I'd like to see him score a little bit more. I know the ball's being shared around. You mentioned Aldridge's great start. He's putting up big points, just putting up big performances in his games too. Hasn't started a game yet this year, but still has looked pretty sharp when he's on the floor. So the Nets finding a way to keep it. It's not like it's necessarily all small ball because they do have a few people they can sprinkle in there, but they found a way to win in those areas. And this is a point I'll draw back when we get to the Bulls point, and why the Bulls won the game against the Nets last night. But the Nets, what do you think they have to do offensively if they want to continue to have success down the stretch, even without obviously Kyrie Irving?
Just develop some more chemistry. Make sure they don't have too many guys who can't space the floor as well on the court at the same time. If you have Bembry, Brown, Javon Carter, maybe Nick Claxton out there at the same time, and I still like Claxton, but I wouldn't call him much of a factor on the offensive end. Things like that, it might limit what they can do. And with Irving being out, it makes it a lot more difficult for the Nets to what do they call it? Like stagger the minutes for their stars. Like if they have all 3 healthy, then it would be a lot easier for them to make sure at least one of them was on the court at all times. But I think where the Nets game against the Bulls turned, and I'm sure I'm not the only one to make this observation, close game. Nets might have even had a small lead in the fourth quarter with Harden and Durant both on the bench. Bulls were able to take advantage and go on a mini run to take the lead. And then they never looked back by the time that the 2 superstars returned. And it's more difficult to stagger them because even if you keep one of those 2 on the court at all times, then the defense can still key in on that one star at all times rather than 2.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, obviously, if you have Kyrie on the floor, it definitely helps out your offensive game, or just another weapon to be out there to produce and put up points. So the Nets, I don't think it's panic mode at all. But I'll ask, what do you think of Steve Nash so far?
It's still almost unbelievable to me that Steve Nash is the coach. And I know
Right.
we've talked about him a lot. I like, for the most part, I think he's still improving, being a relatively new head coach. I think this is his 2nd season, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I thought there were a lot of positive factors going into last season. I thought the way he used Bruce Brown in particular was really, really creative and maximized the versatility of him. Jeff Green, I thought, was more predictable being used in as a guy who could guard multiple positions, and I think they're missing him. Overall, I still don't think he's the easiest guy to evaluate because he has the ridiculous amount of talent on his team, which most new coaches do not have. We also know he's Steve Nash, one of the best players of all time. So I'm not going to sit here and doubt his basketball IQ or his, and considering his personality, I don't think he's a guy who can't manage a locker room either. But he was put into a more fortunate situation than most first-time coaches. And then things like the Kyrie Irving situation are out of his control as well. What's he going to do about that? That's not on him. Overall, I don't think there's any big reasons to be worried about him at the moment, is the short version.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I'll back you on that one. It's hard to evaluate when you have that talent you mentioned, but he does find a way to piece some things together. So I mean, it's an overrated phrase to use in this business, but we'll see how it all finds out, or how it all turns out. But let's switch over to the Chicago Bulls, a team that has been absolutely on fire to start the year. They have dropped a few games, and I want to make this point. My buddy, who's really close to the Bulls, works with the Windy City Bulls and the organization. He told me this before the season started, and I was like, all right, we'll see how legit this is. But Sure enough, this is exactly what he said. He said, when you look at the Chicago Bulls team, I think they're talented. I think they can win a lot of basketball games. But when they match up against a good five, a good big, they're not going to win that game, no matter what it is. And you look at the Bulls, they're 7-3 to start the year. Their three losses, one have come against the New York Knicks. Mitchell Robinson, a big in the middle, swapped with Nerlens Noel. You mentioned the 48 minutes of rim protection. And the other two losses, the 76ers, Joel Embiid, Andre Drummond, two bigs at the five with rim protection for 48 minutes. So that has been one area. It's not all on Nikola Vucevic. He's a great offensive threat. No one's saying that he's the best defensive player in the world. But that's a point that really stands out to me. We mentioned the lack of backup center depth behind him, how we wanted a Nerlens Noel before he went to the Knicks to start last season. But we wanted a backup center, or at least someone that's big and can fill and rebound. But that's not really an area that they addressed. And right now, their only three losses have come against teams with those bigs. So what's your thought process on that?
I think it can be a concern to an extent for the Bulls on the glass. In the Knicks game, Nerlens Noel still hadn't come back yet. So it was Robinson and then Taj Gibson. And of all the 2011 era Bulls with Rose still and Gibson and Thibodeau on the Knicks right now. And then I think they honored Joakim Noah that night.
Joakim Noah night.
The Knicks are still fucking paying right now. Jesus Christ. Anyway, before I get completely sidetracked on that, so I do think that like Vucevic can put up a decent rebounding numbers, but they don't have much of a bench, especially on the interior. And I know we'll get into the Patrick Williams injury here in a minute, which has been the one downside to an otherwise fantastic start for the Bulls. I do think it's something that is going to be a concern for them. I wouldn't call them the strongest team down low. And like the Knicks had more than enough of their own problems with Drummond. Most teams are going to on the glass. And it is something where I think you look at some of the teams in the East. I don't know if the Bulls have played the Heat yet, but a Bam Adebayo could cause some problems. I don't see quite as much of a matchup issue with the Nets off the top of my head there. And I know the Bulls had some success against them. Teams like the Cavaliers, who are off to a surprisingly good start, they have a lot of bigs who can rebound. I do see the point, but outside of the Williams injury, I've been really impressed with this team on both sides of the ball. DeMar DeRozan's going to make me look like an idiot if he keeps this up. He's been off to a ridiculously good start. And I know 10 games in, the Bulls pushed all their chips to the table pretty quickly here in the last year or two at the deadline in the offseason, and they don't really have any picks coming up. So we'll see if that backfires. But for now, I think it's exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting for sure looking at this Bulls team. I mean, right now, you don't really get winning basketball when you go to United Center, or at least over the last decade since Derrick Rose was in his prime before the ACLs. You didn't really get anything with the Chicago Bulls when you arrived at the UC or lived in Chicago or any of that stuff. So, I mean, it was a bad look for the Bulls back then. Now everything's starting to change a little bit. Billy Donovan gets in, gets his own guys, make the trade for Vucevic at the deadline last year, and then you bring in Alonzo Ball, who has really improved this team. That's my next point. You bring in Alonzo Ball, bring in DeMar DeRozan, both great defenders, and that's something the Bulls needed. Was they need to defend the perimeter and do all those other things. So obviously the loss of Patrick Williams, who was a great defender, and being the four down there. They really lost something big with Patrick Williams, but this Bulls defense has looked vastly improved this year.
Well, I'd call Ball and Alex Caruso elite defenders. I'm still not so sure about DeRozan, but that's just me. I think those two are more known for it, but I do see a big improvement. I want to single out actually one of the bench guys that I think has been unheralded during this, who's kind of stepped up, is Javante Green. I think he's come in and been a complete spark plug whenever he's been on the court. And like, I'm not saying he can have the same impact as a Williams, but I do see a similar level of energy and a decent amount of versatility there. And he's been a spark plug when he's come in. I think he's been a really positive impact. DeRozan offensively has been fantastic, putting up 27 a game, I think 6 rebounds. Him and Zach LaVine have looked good together. There are a lot of promising signs. The offense there, like it was still one of the league's better ones last season. I don't think the Bulls had too many problems putting up a lot of points. They did have a lot of problems defending. The perimeter defense has been shored up. I wouldn't call the post defense a strength or anything, but they're in the top 10 in defensive rating and also in the top 10 offensive. That's a pretty good formula to win more often than not. But I do think if the Bulls do have one or two more injuries, it will have a huge impact because there's not a lot of depth.
Yeah, that's true. There's not a lot of depth on this team. You see Derek Jones Jr., Alex Caruso. Um, Outside of that, I mean, you got Troy Brown, Alize Johnson. Like it starts to get ugly after that. One name that has stepped up, that's a depth piece, was the draft pick this year, Oyo Dunsumo from Illinois. So Illinois to Chicago. That was really cool to see him go out there. He's looked pretty good so far in his rookie year too. He's always a feisty guy. He fights after loose balls, and you love that energy off the bench.
Yeah, I did like him at Illinois a lot, and I watched a lot of their games, and they had one of their best years since Darren Williams was the point guard there, and and Dosunmu in limited minutes. What's up?
The boxer, Darren Williams.
Him and Frank Gore. That's gonna. We might have to do a special episode just for that. But Dosunmu, I liked at Illinois a lot, and I thought that getting him in the second round, I believe where the Bulls got him, is a good value. I see him in a similar role. I mean, he's actually doing more than Miles McBride is for the Knicks, a second round pick who could fill in for some veterans if they were to either get injured or I know I should know this off the top of my head, but I forgot to look. Do you have any update on the Kobe White situation?
Yeah, Kobe White, he hasn't played at all this year, obviously dealing with his injury, but they said they're actually looking to trade him, or at least there's rumors circulating around a potential Kobe White deal. Not like he's going to be traded, but they said they're eagerly awaiting his return, and he has been cleared to practice, so he should be on the floor here soon.
Yeah, I think the last thing I remember is that he was supposed to miss the first month or so, maybe 6 weeks of the regular season. We're starting to get close to that. I am really curious if White does stick around. I would assume that once he comes back, that Dosunmu would be relegated back to the bench because Kobe White's still somebody they invested a pretty premium asset into, and he can still score. It's just he's a lot more flawed as a lead guard defensively than Lonzo Ball is.
Yeah, and he's not the best facilitator. We brought that up on the show a couple times. He could step in and he can't facilitate at all. That guy throws the ball into the fifth row when he tries to pass, and he's just the vision isn't really there, but he can shoot. So maybe he can provide a shooting spark off the bench a little bit there too.
Well, us talking about the Bulls going 7-3 and looking really good. Also, us talking about Kobe White and roasting the living shit out of him when he hasn't even played a game yet for the Bulls. So
that's why they're 7-3.
Yeah. Oh, okay. See, Jesus, man, come on.
It makes a difference when marketing isn't there too.
Well, see, now that one I will give you, but but I do think like Kobe White had more to offer than Markkanen did in terms of a clearer fit with the team. I'm not saying Markkanen doesn't have skills that can't be useful, but I especially when the Bulls started upgrading the wing position and then the Vucevic acquisition, I thought that it made it a much more awkward fit for him. Even with Ball and Caruso and Levine in that backcourt, I still see a role for Kobe White as somebody who can definitely put up points as a more of a two guard. So I am really curious to see what kind of role he has. He could theoretically make a very good Bulls offense better. And if Lonzo Ball and Caruso are able to stay healthy up top, I expect the defense, like not saying it'll be in the top 10 the whole year. I still have doubts that's sustainable, but if they could be a more league average team defensively, which I think is achievable, they're going to be a much more dangerous and difficult team to consistently beat. So that would definitely bode well for them. Now, the Eastern Conference as a whole has a lot of teams off to pretty good starts. Now, there's the ones that you would expect with the Nets or the Sixers, but then you got teams like Cleveland who's off to a good start. The Wizards are off to a really good start. Like it's going to be a battle, I think, for some of these teams that not just we cover, but these teams that we covered in the preview episode make the playoffs or avoid that play-in tournament.
Yeah, the Bucks and Hawks both under 500. So that's, I mean, you might be able to see it a little bit with Atlanta, but I mean, Milwaukee, those are two big teams that have obviously made it far in the postseason last year. So I mean, the Eastern Conference is going to be a dogfight. We'll see how the play-in tournament goes and how the season goes as we continue on. But that's all we have today, covering the teams with Knicks, Nets, and Bulls. Stay tuned for next week. We'll get into some NFL, some NHL, all that good stuff. There might be some MLB news, maybe not next week, but down the line as we continue on to the off season. And we'll do an off-season episode in that area, a few months, a few weeks down the line, and that aspect of it too. But I appreciate everybody that tuned in today. Be sure to check us out on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere you get your podcast. Be sure to leave a like, leave a subscribe, leave a follow, leave a comment, leave a review, all that good stuff. Make sure you continue to follow us on the Big City Sports PD on Twitter. Stay tuned for any updates in that area as it goes to show and any releases in that area. But I appreciate everyone that tuned in today. And for Slig, I'm Dylan, and we will see you next time.